Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 339, and today's guest is Andy Palmer, serial entrepreneur, seed investor, and now author. Andy is one of my OGs, that being original guests. If you go way back into the archives of the VentureFizz Podcast, you'll find my first interview with him for episode 22 back in 2018. In that interview, we talk about his full background story, his career building companies like Tamr Vertica, plus investing in companies. For this interview, Andy and I connected for a different reason. He has written a book with his co-author, Paula Caliguiri, titled Live for a Living: How to Create Your Career Journey to Work Happier, Not Harder. The two met on a Bumble date, which resulted in a friendship and a collaboration for this book, which is useful at any stage of one's career. It's ultimately a guide to designing a life that leverages your personal values, motivators, and goals in your career. I'm a fan of audiobooks, so it was fun listening to Andy and Paula narrate the book, and I have to admit, they both have great voices for it. Plus, it was cool to know some of the people that they highlight in the book, like Elizabeth Lawler, CEO and co-founder of AppMap, who was recently on my podcast. The format of this interview is different from my normal style, which was fun and a good change of pace. In this episode, we chat about how Andy got involved in AI back in the 80s and how this is his third AI hype cycle, plus the details about his latest company, DBoss, the inspiration behind this book, the 5 phases of ideal careers, that being starter phase, foundational phase, high growth phase, high focus phase, and give back phase. We go through each phase in detail. Why a simultaneous career path could be a benefit, the advantages of working at startups and how it can push your career forward, and so much more. There is obviously a lot more to this book than what we had the opportunity to chat about, so make sure you check it out. It's titled again, Live for a Living. You can go to Amazon or the audio versions on Spotify or any other major outlet. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Andy. Andy, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Keith, great to see you again. Really terrific to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. You're one of the original guests from my podcast. I was looking in the archives of VentureFizz, and I think it was 2018, episode 22. So if you want to hear Andy's full background story, there's an hour-long podcast on venturefizz.com/podcast. But if people aren't familiar, I think it's important to at least talk about, your background and who you are before we get into the book.
You bet. Well, I started off as a computer scientist. I started, first time I touched a keyboard as a kid, I fell in love with software, and I still think it's magic. It's amazing that I get paid to play with computers. So in the 80s, I started a bunch of AI stuff. And then in the 90s, as people...
Wait, hold on. I did catch that in your book too. So what, Trilogy was AI?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And, during the early 90s, there was sort of a backlash in AI and people weren't talking about it. But Trilogy at its core was a constraint-based inference engine. And, very, very much, the most modern version of AI back in the day. And so really, at its core, Trilogy and PC Order, the company we spun off from Trilogy, was very AI-based. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So the amazing thing with AI or in the early days, you were working with
AI. I feel like I've been through, this is the third hype cycle I've been through in AI. So kind of the 80s, the 90s, and now. But it's really remarkable. People's definition of AI has changed. People now like to think of AI as something that's always in the future. I started off working on neural nets back in the 80s, and there's this amazing example of neural nets now, which is Google Translate, arguably the biggest and most obvious, win for neural nets. But when you talk about Google Translate as an AI thing, then people are like, oh, that's not AI. And we're like, no, that is, that was aspirational for so long, but now AI has become associated with anything that's going to be 5 to 10 years out, So, and my favorite one, I've got a really good friend, and I think this is where we are in AI right now, is this really good friend of mine, Andre Vargas, who's the chief data officer out in at CAA, the talent agency in Hollywood. And Andre likes to say that AI doesn't stand for artificial intelligence, it stands for augmented intuition. And I think it's true. I think the reality of where we are, with AI is that it's more the application of these tools and this math and the data that helps other human beings be, successful in whatever they're doing. And so I like augmented intuition better than artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Well, my apologies. I'm a bad host. I totally cut you off as you were talking about your career because I did
Yeah.
catch that AI piece. I'm like, wait, I do need to ask Andy about that. But so you did a trilogy, PC Order, and
Yeah,
then
a bunch of e-commerce and internet stuff in the 90s. But then at the end of the 90s, my friend Frank Moss kind of, inspired me. And he was like, well, we've built a lot of software, sold a lot of software, made a bunch of money, but how's the world any better or different? And we fell in love with the idea of working at the intersection of computer science and tech and the life sciences. And so we helped start a biotech company called Infinity Pharmaceuticals. And then eventually I went over and ran data and software engineering over at NIBR, the research group for Novartis here in Cambridge. And then again, you sort of dovetail with a whole bunch of startups kind of sprinkled in there in various ways. But in the last 10 years, it's been mostly about helping other entrepreneurs get their companies started through Koa Labs. And now I'm at the very end of my career and focus mostly on how I give back. And that now is mostly through these other seed funds that we've invested in at Koa. Yeah.
but I mean, yes, you are involved in lots of different initiatives and giving back. But I did see you were once again working closely with one of your co-founders and partners, Mike Stonebreaker, on a new company.
Yeah, we had a really cool project that was, inspired by the academic work of my partner Mike Stonebreaker and Matei Zaharia, who's a co-founder of Databricks. And the new company is called DBOS, DBOS. So if you go to dbos.dev, you can see what we're up to. It's a really cool system that's for people that are building new applications using microservices, and they need highly transactional results, a system that scales really well and is highly reliable, great transactional integrity. So very, very useful thing for anybody that's trying to do microservices at scale. Yeah.
All right, so you just covered a lot. You've done a lot throughout your career, but the new title you can add to the roster is author. So what prompted you to write Live for a Living? How did it come together? And what was it like just writing a book and then doing the audio version?
So my co-author, really amazing woman, Paula Caliguiri, who is great. We actually, there's a interesting backstory. We met dating. We met on Bumble, on the dating app, and we dated for about a month, and it was great. But like romantically, it didn't work out. But we started talking about work and all the amazing research she does, and this. A couple of books that she had written previously, and she was kind of getting ready to do a kind of a new thing, and it just sort of dovetailed into amazing partnership. And so we spent a good chunk of COVID working on the book, which for me, not a lot of other distractions during COVID, so it sort of was a healthy time to sit down and focus. And but tons of fun, really tons of fun, and also great. The book has a lot of stories in it from people that I've known over the years, and really one of the best parts of the process was reconnecting with those people and telling their stories.
Yeah, which I thought was really cool because it was names that I recognize, and I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that's really cool. So, um, Elizabeth Lawler, she was a recent guest on the podcast with AppMap, and obviously what she did prior and Conjure. So, yeah, I mean, and there's multiple names, and I'm like, that's so cool. Like it just usually you listen to books and you're like have a vision of who these people might be, but when you actually know them, it's like a different level.
Yeah, and it was I mean, one of my favorite things about our community here in Boston, for sure, is the ecosystem is reasonably sized compared to the
Hmm.
Bay Area, and so we all know each other, and there's a lot of intimacy that comes along with that. So a lot of same, and especially amongst the good people that are really capable. You kind of know who they all are.
And I think the title is very, it's a great, play on words. It's y- work for a living, and then the title has, work boxed out by live, right, for a
Yeah.
living, which makes sense. Like your career is such a big piece in how much you spend your day and so much of your life that it should be living for a living or live for a living versus work for a living.
Totally. There's this dynamic, a lot of times people are prone to say, "Oh, you should find your passion, and if you work in an area that you're passionate about, you never work a day in your life," kind of thing. It doesn't actually work that way, Um, like over and over. And our target for the book was mostly younger folks, And we saw a lot of younger folks that sort of, when they went down this path of trying to pursue for their work the things they were passionate about, their expectations were almost like unreasonable, and the process of having experiences in your work, we like to call them career acts in the book. Reid Hoffman calls these tours of duty. But it's this idea that, like, you go out and you have these career acts and you do something for some period of time. And when you're early, when you're in 20s, in the first phase of your career, a lot of those things are telling you what you don't want to do. And if you go into that process coming maybe straight out of school or something, and your expectation is, well, I'm going to have this job and I'm going to love it and it's going to pay my bills. Like, like, if you work hard at constructing the right career acts over the course of a career, maybe when you get to, this later stage in your career, you'll be in a place where you get to do what you love and it pays the bills and all these kinds of things. But it's a very aspirational thing. Like, and one of the messages that we like to send in the book is, listen, like, focus on where you are in your journey and in your career, and do the things that make sense for you in your life and your career. And sometimes you get lucky and find something you're passionate about. Sometimes, you're doing a job to pay the bills, like, and that's okay, right? Yeah. Don't try and pack too much expectation into those first jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book, covers such a wide range, and there's, anyone can get something out of this book, regardless of where you're at in your career journey. But those 5 phases that you talk about, so there's the starter phase, the foundational phase, the high growth phase, the high focus phase, and the give back phase. So let's unpack that. So, like, what's the starter phase?
So the starter phase is, just like I was talking about earlier. Like, you just got to get going, right? You just have to do some stuff. And I think the biggest challenge for a lot of the young people that I've known and talked to recently, is they're just a little reluctant to get started. Maybe they've been, lived their life a little bit too much off of check boxes that are required to get into college or whatever. And so you just got to get started. You just need to do something. And that involves sort of taking a little bit of risk. And entrepreneurs, kind of most of the people that I work with, are pretty good at that, And so, but I think in the mainstream, for most people, in the early days, like, you just have to do something, and don't overweight those first experiences. I remember when I was just coming out of college, I got this great advice from a guy named Don LeBeau, who is the first chief operating officer at Cisco. And I was sort of putting all this weight on the first job I was going to get out of school. And Don said to me, he's like, Andy, like, whatever this first job is, if you do a good job, if you're successful within 5 years, that thing's going to drop off your resume, and no one will ever know that you did it. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, totally. If you do what you want to do, if you're really ambitious and aspirational. And so these first experiences in that starter phase, they're experiences. And you treat it like, an experiment. When you do each one of these, you're like, well, what did I learn? What did I get out of it? What was good? What was bad? And that informs you in your career, your decision for your next career act. And so that time in your 20s is about running those experiments, running a lot of them. And some people that are really ambitious, they can even do multiple simultaneous, in sort of the gig economy thing, where my daughter is like this. She's a photo retoucher, high-end photo retoucher out in LA. And Morgan's thing is, she does a lot of projects simultaneously, and is able to balance it all. It's pretty remarkable to watch. And our economy is kind of set up now to support that. Like, you can do lots of simultaneous stuff, and you can get really rewarded for it. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Well, I think sometimes when, newly minted college grads struggle with is also like building a network. So how did you know Don, and like, how did you even get advice from someone like that? Like, what advice would you have for
Yeah.
college grads on networking?
Yeah, so this is another big theme in the book. It's like, we believe in apprenticeship and mentorship. We think that one of the things that was lost over the last century, as the world industrialized, was this idea of mentorship and apprenticeship. And you have to always be seeking people to add to your network, and aggressively adding those folks. And my parents I was really lucky. They really coached me and encouraged me to get to know people like Don. And it was hard at first. It was a little, it feels a little risky and kind of intimidating. But whenever I talk to young people now, I really encourage them to, seek out people, because a lot of people, when you're at these later stages in your career, kind of like I am now, you get a lot of satisfaction from, mentoring other folks and helping them. And so one of the lessons that we kind of call out in the book is, you got the young people, you should really understand that when you reach out to these folks, you're not just doing what's good for you, you're also really providing an opportunity for those potential mentors to invest in you, and then they get a ton of feedback when those people are when the young people are successful. So I think that mentor apprenticeship thing, man, that's like so important, and you just have to take the risk and call people. And young people, like, they'll be shocked at how many and how enthusiastic older people are to kind of help out and give them advice.
Yeah, and I'll just build off of that. Like, start with your alumni network of your school.
Right.
9 times out of 10, they're gonna follow up with you. They might be busy, maybe it won't be instantaneous, but
Right.
they're gonna follow up with someone that is just out of the school that they graduated from, because they have that pride. They want to see their alums succeed. So reach out on LinkedIn. There's ways to get emails at work or whatever. Like that is the go-to. And I have 2 daughters, one in college, one in high school, that I am constantly just telling them, networking, networking,
Yeah.
networking builds your network.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And it's really it's a powerful thing. And if you start doing that early, there's like a compounding effect, right? The earlier you start networking and reaching out and start building your network, it really compounds pretty aggressively. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And it's okay that it feels unnatural.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
even going
Yeah.
to an event and being like the person that you don't know anyone in the room and have to look around and strike up a conversation, so painfully hard when you first start doing it. But
And
the more you do it,
it's Yeah, that's right. And the muscle that you're building is, you're getting used to being uncomfortable in that way.
yeah.
And after a while, the discomfort disappears, and it's just networking. Especially when you get some positive feedback, that when people are psyched to talk to you and inspired, by your ambition and all this kind of thing. Yeah, it's cool.
All right, so foundational phase. When I think about kind of my career, like, I started out in working for KPMG, and
Mhm.
it wasn't my thing. I love the firm. It was a great foundational like experience, but I wanted to get in the tech industry,
Yeah.
and I didn't have tech sales, which is what I thought I was going to do, like software sales.
Yeah.
No one would hire me. So then I discovered recruiting, and it was a perfect segue, and it is kind of like a sales job, because back then I was making 60 dials a day into people working at Accenture Consulting. Um,
Yeah.
so anyways, I consider that entry into the tech industry as a recruiter as my true foundational phase of
Yeah.
building who I was and what I wanted to be professionally.
Yeah, totally. And that startup phase, like, you're basically running these series of experiments and learning what you like and you don't like, and what you're good at and what you're not, and what people value in you. And then in that foundational phase, you're like, all right, I've got enough data now to sort of make a judgment about which career acts are going to be more leveraged, right? That are going to interest me more, where I'm going to get paid more, if that's your priority, and where people are really going to value you. And so you start investing in one area, get more focused in terms of your career acts. And in my career, I came out of grad school and worked for some amazing entrepreneurs. First, this guy Joe Lemont at Trilogy down in Austin, Texas, and then he and John Price, and then Christy Jones and we did this startup called PCOrder.com. But I think of those experiences as like they were like entrepreneurial apprenticeships. I was learning how to be an entrepreneur and learning about how to do it really well. And then eventually Frank Moss, my partner and good friend now for years, those experiences all shaped me and taught me, so that when I eventually kind of was in my foundational phase and I started my own company, with my partner Mike Stonebreaker at Vertica, like, I felt like I had an unfair advantage because I already kind of knew all the dynamics and all the rules, starting companies, of course, is really hard and prone to failure. So you kind of want all the unfair advantage you can get when you're starting. And one of what I felt was my unfair advantage is I'd done all these career acts, start, working with these other great entrepreneurs, and I just seen what works and what doesn't, and tried to get take the benefit of all of that learning and plow it into my first startup that I did myself at Vertica. Yeah.
Well, and then it extends into the high growth phase, right? And that's when you're like
Yeah.
accelerating your career. Like I guess for me, trying to relate, to this foundation, and by the way, everyone like that's listening, this is just part of the book. There's so many exercises and things that like this. There's so much to this book. We're just kind of like only have so much time to carve out a couple pieces, but the high growth phase. So when I left this recruiting firm after 4 years, I felt like I had the skills to do something on my own, and I left, and then I started Decero, and we were doing, chief product officer searches and VP of marketing. I didn't start out doing that, but I eventually got to that point, and that was my, high growth phase is what I would
Totally.
consider that. Yeah.
Totally. And for me, that high growth phase, it's really about like once you've practiced this more focused thing, now you're like, all right, how do I juice it up and create as much leverage as possible? And for me, that was kind of when I started Koa Labs, my seed fund, and we started investing in other companies. And my focus for my foundational phase was how many entrepreneurs can I enable? In the same way that Joe and Christy and Frank and my friend Steve Holtzman, they'd all enabled me to learn how to do this startup thing really well. And so for me, in that hyper growth phase was how many other entrepreneurs can I help to get started? And I had a real focus on underserved communities of entrepreneurs, so mostly women, immigrants, and people of color. But that was like, for me, that high growth phase is all about like how many entrepreneurs can I get behind and help them, build their companies from scratch. Yeah.
And one of the things that you talk about in the book that I thought was really important, and sometimes I struggle with, is the importance of saying no, right?
Mhm.
Like I like to make people happy, and I rarely turn down meetings. Yet there's people that I know really well and I admire, and that's one of their secrets. They're like, you just got to say no to things.
Yeah, it's so hard. And I'm a really bad role model on this for sure. Like, don't do what I do. Sometimes I get people, saying, like, how do I, start a fund the way you did or be an entrepreneur? Like, I'm like, I don't know if I'm a good role model. It kind of works for me, but because I'm really not good at saying no. I sort of live in the world of opportunity and believe in the potential of uh, people to start companies and make a difference in the world through those companies. So I'm really bad at saying no. But in some ways, I think that one of the things to do, I'm kind of in this next phase of my life now, and I've got these three granddaughters that I love more than anything, and so like time with them matters more to me than anything, and so it's a bit easier for me to say no now because I've sort of got something else I want to do. And so in my work, I've gotten more disciplined about saying no, so that I can spend more time with my grandkids. And that's often a good method. If you're wired the way we are and you're wired for opportunity, as long as you, do a really good job of how you want to prioritize your time, then that's a good frame of reference of, how you need to say no and when. But often it's early in your career, saying yes and leaning in to more opportunity tends to be the kind of thing. And then over time, as you move into these later stages in your career, kind of the bar goes up a little bit. And you just kind of like can't say no to everything. And, I give a lot of credit to my now ex-wife, who used to ask me after every startup project, she'd be like, well, of all the stuff you did and this time you spent on this project, like what of those things actually moved the needle? And it was always, the answer was always like 5 or 10% of the things I spent time on that really mattered. And it's sort of, she created this discipline in me where I had to like get really good at, with every startup project of deciding what are the things that are going to really move the needle and which ones aren't. And I think what enabled me to do multiple things simultaneously later in my career was I just filtered out a lot of the stuff that was kind of a waste of time. and fiercely focus on only the things that are really going to move the needle in any given project. And so yeah, so I give my ex-wife a bit of credit on that one.
So the high focus phase, I relate that to like, so I built this career as a executive recruiter, but then I start this side thing, and we're going to talk about simultaneous things. VentureFizz as a side thing that I just was like, oh, I aggregate all this information of who got funded, who's hiring, what events you should go to. Maybe I should just put it on a website, and I don't know, maybe people follow it. And then all of a sudden it became my high focus phase of building out, like leaving the search world and focus on scaling a subscription business for the tech industry. So I haven't entered the give back phase yet. I'm not there
Yeah.
yet. I hope I get there eventually, but I mean, I try to give back when I can. Like I wish I had more things to give back to, and that was actually heading into this year. One of my goals was, I do want to do something that's outside of the tech industry that is giving back, that's charitable, that's something that's meaningful for the community.
Yeah. Well, giving back means lots of things to lots of people. And like, whether you realize it or not, you give back to me all the time. I listen to your stuff religiously, and because it's so like deliberate and focused, and the quality is so high. But some people, when it comes to giving back, are more philanthropic, and it's truly altruistic. But like a big part of me, like I think God put me on this earth specifically to do startups and software stuff and tech stuff, and for me, I plow a lot of the money that I've made over the years back into early stage entrepreneurs, because I think that is like a form of giving back for me. And we've got some other great people in our community here in Boston that are like that. So Steve Papa is like that, and he writes a lot of checks and supports a lot of great entrepreneurs. Big fan of Steve. And Langley Steinert is like that now. He does it. Brian Halligan, and people like Eric Paley and the whole team at Founder Collective. Like giving back doesn't always mean philanthropy. Giving back can mean giving back to the community of which you've been a part of for a long time. And a lot of us that are entrepreneurial like that, that's kind of how we see it. And and my fund Koa was really like all about that. Trying to give back. Yeah. And now at Koa, instead of investing directly in companies, we invest in other seed funds. So it's a little bit more indirect. So we have like 22 plus other seed funds that we're a limited partner, and Founder Collective being the biggest. And for me, giving back now is like supporting the other seed funds in the market that are backing hundreds and hundreds of other startups.
Yeah, that's a great multiplier effect. And I guess I got to give myself a little bit more credit than when because to your point, like, oh, you're right. I do actually like give back a lot, just not in the, charitable, philanthropic way all of the time. So,
Well,
all right,
in the
well,
words of the next generation, I appreciate you, Keith. I appreciate
all right. So simultaneous career paths, right? Like that was part of the
Yeah.
book too. And there was advice on why you should do that, why it's a good option, and some good advice on what not to do if you're doing that too.
Yeah, well, it's you got to be careful because it's not right for everybody, right? Like, and doing things simultaneously can be really hard and really challenging, and so it really is not the right configuration for a lot of people. But if you're wired for interest and opportunity, and you need a bunch of stimulation, to kind of keep you happy intellectually, it can be really rewarding. And the world has never been set up better to do this. Like all this gig economy stuff, where it's relatively easy to set up your own business and kind of like get lots of things going on at the same time. And so there's a lot of infrastructure out of the box. My friend Omer Tryman has this company Askfora that's kind of like natively enabling people to do this, and have lots of simultaneous gigs. But it's important to not overcommit yourself, right? So any one of us, we only have so much time in the day, and it's easy. And I almost did this a couple of times, where I like kind of got myself into a position where I had like way more commitments than I had time, energy, and effort. And fortunately, it wasn't disastrous, but I was able to kind of realize what was going on, and I over time sort of focused it onto a smaller number. but everybody's got to figure out that balance on their own. And the people that are prone to be good at it are probably, they're probably inherently looking for a lot of stimulation. And so, you just got to be realistic about how much you can actually take on. In my world, in startups, like each one of these companies is like infinitely needy. They need they're fundamentally imperfect when they get started. And so, if you're doing this in startup space, you have to be careful because any one of these companies could consume all of your time. And so it's really a delicate balance. But if you really, and we talk about this a lot in the book, if you're really inspired and you want more stimulating, right? Like the world has never been, positioned better to give you a lot of that stim. You just got to be careful not to overcommit yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously you don't want to be doing things on the company dime that, that's, you need to separate the two.
Yeah.
But I think, when we talked about Elizabeth Lawler and her husband,
Yeah.
Kevin, like how they started Conjure was, it was nights, right? Like one was working full time on it while one was working and paying the bills, nights, weekends. I mean, the way they build companies is not to raise an extraordinary amount of capital to try to prove a point. They raise a minimal amount, build up a solution that is addressing a pain point, and then continue to fund the business. Like it's just
Yeah.
not overly capitalized as far as, our conversation we had.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of capital efficient companies. And we had sort of this thing back in the 2000s that were a reaction to the internet bubble. It kind of what came out of it was kind of lean startup, as they like to call it. And then we've been through another bubble in the 2010s, and in many ways, actually, the bubble in the 2010s was like 7 times bigger than the internet bubble in terms of the amount of capital invested. And so it's hard to grok the scale of that. And so now capital efficiency is back again. Lean startup is back. And I think that's really healthy. I've always believed in capital efficiency in startups. This idea, Google has the saying of scarcity creates clarity. And I really believe that in startups. Even if you can raise a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, it doesn't always mean that you should. And even if you do raise that much money, well, you shouldn't spend it as fast as the investors might want you to spend it. You have to make sure that you're getting a big return on every dollar. And so this idea of being capital efficient, I think it also applies to your time. And making sure that, especially as you go into these later stages of your middle stages in your career, making sure that you're getting the best return on your time that you possibly can, and being very time efficient, and as leveraged as possible in everything that you do. And now oftentimes that requires focus. It's sort of the opposite of this, like, okay, spread out and do multiple things simultaneously. If you're really going to get a lot of leverage, you got to be a bit more focused. And so, but the right, mix of focus and opportunity is at the heart of the real challenge, and the art of building a great career journey is managing that balance between focus and opportunity, and making sure that it's the right mix for you.
Well, regardless of where someone's at in their career, they need to be focused on hopefully crushing their career. And what I want to talk to you about, because this is part of the book too, is like, you didn't title it this way. I'm going to title it this way, but like crushing your career in a startup, regardless if you're entry level, mid career, later stage, it doesn't matter. Like, you talk about, core components like, make sure you have a critical role, skills
Yeah.
that are hard to replace, reliability, visibility, high quality work. So that's a lot, but I wanted to like, focus on those pieces because, joining a startup, I've been in it my whole career, you have, and I'm just such an advocate that what you learn in those years of building a company is just going to outweigh, what you could learn in a, Fortune 100 or whatever.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And there's a sort of a highly situational context, like in these startups. Like there isn't flexibility to kind of worry about the wrong stuff, or like you have to do what you have to do. And I think one of the most important things, like Larry Ellison had this quote. from way back, which was like there's only two real jobs in any company: building things and selling things. And I think it's a really healthy discipline to be like, well, like, am I focused? Is my job really building stuff or is it really selling stuff? And if it's not like clearly in one of those two camps, like, ooh, you're kind of at risk of not creating enough value, right? And sometimes people love to hedge in their work. And as well, I'm the person that takes the requirements from the users and gives them to the software engineers. It's kind of like that old cliche Office Space quote. I love that movie. It was so good in so many ways.
So good.
And
Such a great
yeah,
movie.
right. And so like being honest about with yourself in whatever your role is, and saying, well, like in my role, whatever, however it's defined, if I'm not moving the needle in terms of sales and helping the company grow and close more business, or helping the company build a great product that satisfies customers more and more every day, like, then you have to kind of squint to see, well, what are you doing, and startups, like, you can't afford to be in a job where you have to squint. You want your value to be immediate and obvious and measured, ideally either in sales numbers and new customers being acquired, or in existing customers being more satisfied than ever before. And whether you're writing code or just helping the customer get deployed or what have you in software. So like being really disciplined about, like, well, whatever I'm doing, however my role has been set up, making sure I'm either moving the needle in terms of growing the company, helping it get bigger faster, or making customers happier. Those are, I think it's really healthy discipline.
Yeah, and like a big piece of advice that I've always told people along the way, like, oh, well, joining a startup could be risky, right? And I mean, you could go anywhere and you're going to get laid off, Fidelity, whatever. But I'm always like, um, how are you building your career so that you are employable, that you are
Yeah,
constantly pushing yourself and having skills that are highly marketable and highly desirable, therefore you're employable. So those skills that are hard to replace, skills that are in demand, you always got to be
yeah.
thinking about yourself and putting yourself on that type of level.
Totally. I like to describe this. I'm a big sci-fi, fan and stuff, and I love, the metaphor I like to use is like Game of Thrones, like being close to the wall, right? Like the benefit of being in startups all the time is you kind of live close to the wall. The threat of the company going out of business, of failure, is always there, and it keeps you tuned and ready and efficient and focused. Um, and then the bigger the company is, you kind of move further and further back from the face of the wall. And it insulates you from the reality of what really moves the needle, either acquiring new customers or making them happy. And so, if you're in startups, you have this benefit of being that close to the wall. And if those startups are growing really fast and things are really, you get all of these, like, it's like career experience coming at you through a fire hose, right? If you're in these bigger companies and you're further away from the wall, it's kind of diluted, right? You don't really know or see what really moves the needle in the growth of that business over time, maybe until you get to be really senior in that company. But so the benefit of startups, and in terms of like your career acuity and your journey, is you're gonna know and feel every day what really works and what doesn't, what matters and what doesn't. And there's a certain muscle that you build where, like, when you don't have that clarity, it kind of freaks you out. And I only did one stint at a big company, which was Novartis, for 5 or 6 years, and it was amazing to me because I couldn't do things that weren't moving the needle. Um, but it was amazing how many people were there just kind of punching the clock. Like, they were so far back from the wall, like they could have done nothing, they could have not shown up, and it wouldn't have mattered. And so I think those are the trade-offs that we make when we work for smaller, more aggressive startup kind of companies, or these bigger companies. But I tell you, my time at Novartis was amazing. It was really great experience, and the resources were remarkable. The downside of startups is, like, oftentimes you just don't have enough resources to do what you need to do. And benefit of being in one of these bigger companies, tons and tons of resources that are available. Yeah.
Well, as a company scales, like you've been CEO of multiple companies, visibility is one of these factors of how to crush your career in a startup. But as it scales, it's harder for the CEO to recognize everyone's contributions. So what
Yeah.
advice would you have on that, visibility of making your contributions known?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to make sure that what you're doing really lines up with the top level KPIs of the company, and that whatever you're doing is like moving those numbers really aggressively. I think being fiercely quantitative about it, and if you can't see like how what you're doing moves the needle. And one of my favorite areas to talk about this is in product management. So in product management, you are kind of in between the engineers and the customers, and you're always trying to sort of optimize, what features and functions people need, yeah, and any other changes that are necessary to make customers happy. And so the discipline in product management when it comes to this dynamic is to make sure that the features and functions you're prioritizing are really going to either radically satisfy customers, or they're going to cause new deals, new customers to be acquired really, really fast. And because it's software is sort of the classic example where it's really hard because it's so intangible. I've met a lot of product managers over the years who were really good at making a case to build something that they thought was important, but didn't really matter to customers, either old or existing customers or new ones. And so you got to be really disciplined about making sure everything you do is going to move the needle in these very, very top line stuff. Yeah.
Now, I did talk about, economic conditions. It doesn't matter, good companies, big companies, small companies. However, I don't want to be like totally tone deaf to what's going on in the tech industry right now. And it is rocky times for a lot of people. And it's been a really long time, a couple of years now, where hopefully the pendulum swing in the right direction again. But what should people be thinking about as they're, looking at the risk factors at companies? Like, what's their own due diligence that they should do on a company before joining it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always the most important thing, and we talk about this a lot in the book, is, like first, make sure whatever the company's doing, whatever their mission is, make sure it's something you care about. Like, it's much easier to be satisfied in your work when the company is producing products, services, and value in a way that is exciting to you. And so I really encourage people to like start there. But the second thing I think that the people should put in perspective again, what the where we were at the end of the 2010s was a level of enthusiasm, irrational exuberance, enthusiasm that was 7 times the peak of the internet boom. And so there's a couple of generations of people that came into the economy during the 2010s, and the only frame of reference they had was this 7x inflated kind of thing. And so the reality right now where we are, it's actually pretty good. You look at the US economy, things are pretty good. Like, it's good. It'd be great when interest rates come down a little bit more, but it'll probably eventually happen. But still a lot of opportunities out there in the world. And at some level, again, I believe in scarcity creating clarity. So the challenge that people might have right now in finding their first job or in finding another job, I think it just sort of causes you to up your game a bit and be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit smarter. I'm always for people in tech. I always think it's good. The more technical you are, the better. Like if you're retooling right now and figure like the more you lean towards learning technical things and being sophisticated in terms of the tech, the better off you are. And so I think that's a really good, sort of principle. And the other thing is that when you're looking at a potential new company that you might join, I think you really want to like turn up the filter in terms of BS, right? There are many companies out there that have a lot of money that are funded that may or may not have a future. And figuring out, if this is a company that's really going to be an incredible business over time, or whether they just got lucky and raised a bunch of money or something like that. I think that's a really, it's tough to do, but to be aware of that and sensitive to it, that just because a company exists and has a payroll and maybe hundreds of employees, doesn't necessarily mean that that company has a big long term future. Yeah.
So the audiobook, like, do you go to a studio to do that? And like, how does that process
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, we kind of made a mistake. So we published the printed book first, and then we went and recorded the audiobook. We should have done it the opposite, because when you sit down, and you have to read in a studio your book in a studio over the course of a week or two. You realize all the stuff you want to fix, and so in retrospect, we should have done the audiobook first. We recorded the audiobook first. We would have changed a bunch of stuff and then put that into the print version. But we think it's pretty good, and has most of what's required in there. And it was a fun process for sure. But for me, I'm a team person. You know me, I'm a rugby guy, and for me, it's always team. So having the team that Paula and I were, along with our friend Janice Brown, who helped us out a lot, we the three of us really, had a lot of fun working together.
Well, we covered a couple of the segments of this book. It's again, there's so much in this book that covers it would be impossible to obviously do a 45, 50-minute podcast about it. But I did want to get a couple of the key pieces out of it. But it's awesome to catch up, and it's awesome to see that now you're a published author. And this book, it just combines so much of your experience and knowledge between yourself and Paula. So thanks for pulling it all together. It is a book that I think anyone at any point in their career can get a lot of value from. So, uh, if you are interested in this book, you got to check it out. It's called Live for a Living. And if you go to their website, which is My Journey, that's MYJOURNII.com, you'll have all the details of how you can download the book, buy it, listen to it. I did the audiobook format on Spotify, and it was fun to hear you and Paula talk the whole time because you guys played off of each other really well. So thanks for taking all this knowledge and putting it out there for everyone to obviously benefit from.
Thanks, Keith. And again, thanks for all the work you do, telling so many great stories. Like as I said, I listen to your podcast religiously, and the stories you tell are amazing source of inspiration for so many of us in the community. Thank you.